Have you ever wondered how someone could go from playing a beloved superhero on television to becoming the second in command of one of America's most notorious cults? Well, for the first time since her release from federal prison, Allison Mack has broken her silence about her role in NXIVM, and what she's revealing will shock you to your core. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just another celebrity scandal. This is the story of how manipulation, power, and psychological warfare destroyed lives on an industrial scale. And after years of silence, the woman at the center of it all has finally decided to speak. My name is your host, and I've spent months researching court documents, victim testimonies, and recorded conversations to bring you the most comprehensive breakdown of what really happened inside NXIVM. What you're about to hear goes far beyond anything the mainstream media has covered. We're talking about systematic abuse, branding ceremonies, sexual trafficking, and a level of psychological manipulation that would make seasoned FBI agents sick to their stomachs. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. Allison Mack wasn't just a victim who got in too deep. According to her own confession and federal prosecutors, she was Keith Ranier's most trusted lieutenant, actively recruiting women into what can only be described as a modern-day slavery operation. And now, for the first time since walking out of federal prison, she's admitting to using her fame as what she calls a power tool to destroy lives. In this video, I'm going to walk you through Mack's stunning confession, reveal the horrific details of what actually happened behind closed doors, and show you evidence that will make you question everything you thought you knew about this case. We're going to examine the recorded conversations between Mack and Ranier that brought down their entire operation, explore the systematic branding ceremonies that left women permanently scarred, and uncover how a television actress became the architect of psychological torture. But first, let me give you some context that will blow your mind. This isn't just about one actress making bad decisions. We're talking about an organization that operated for over 2 decades, recruited thousands of members, and generated hundreds of millions of dollars while hiding a secret subset that federal prosecutors called a criminal enterprise designed specifically for sexual exploitation. The woman you knew as Chloe Sullivan from Smallville orchestrated recruitment campaigns that specifically targeted vulnerable women, designed branding ceremonies that caused excruciating pain, and helped create a system of psychological control so sophisticated that victims would thank their abusers. And according to her recent podcast appearance, she's finally ready to admit the truth about what she did and why she did it. Now, before we dive into the details, I want to warn you that what we're about to discuss involves graphic descriptions of abuse, manipulation, and systematic torture. But understanding how these operations work is crucial because groups like NXIVM are still operating today, and the techniques they used are being replicated by other predators around the world. So, what exactly was NXIVM? And how did a small self-help organization become a federal case that resulted in multiple life sentences? The organization was founded in 1998 by Keith Ranier, a man who convinced thousands of people that he was one of the smartest humans who ever lived. Ranier claimed to have developed a revolutionary curriculum called Executive Success Programs that would help people overcome their psychological limitations and achieve their full potential. On the surface, NXIVM looked like any other personal development company. They held seminars in major cities, attracted successful professionals and celebrities, and charged thousands of dollars for their courses. Members would participate in intensive workshops, work on overcoming their fears and limiting beliefs, and many reported positive experiences in the beginning. But what members didn't know was that NXIVM was designed from the ground up to identify and isolate the most vulnerable participants for something far more sinister. Behind the self-help facade, Raniere was building a sophisticated recruitment pipeline that would eventually feed women into a secret organization called DOS, where they would be branded like cattle, forced into sexual servitude, and psychologically destroyed through systematic abuse. And this is where Allison Mack enters the story. Mack first encountered NXIVM in 2006 when she was at the height of her television career. Like many celebrities who joined the organization, she was initially attracted to the promise of personal growth and spiritual development. She attended seminars, participated in intensives, and quickly became one of Raniere's most devoted followers. But according to her recent confession, something much darker was happening behind the scenes. Mack has now admitted that Raniere specifically targeted her vulnerability around sexuality and intimacy, convincing her that he could help her overcome childhood trauma through what he called experiential therapy. In reality, this was the beginning of a grooming process that would transform a successful actress into the architect of systematic abuse. What makes Mack's confession so significant is that she's finally acknowledging her active role in recruiting and manipulating other women. For years, her legal team portrayed her as another victim of Raniere's manipulation, someone who was brainwashed and coerced into committing crimes. But her recent statements paint a very different picture of someone who understood exactly what she was doing and used her celebrity status to lure unsuspecting women into a trap. According to federal prosecutors, Mack didn't just participate in NXIVM's crimes. She was instrumental in designing and implementing the most brutal aspects of their operation. She helped create the recruitment strategies that targeted vulnerable women, participated in designing the branding ceremonies that left permanent scars, and served as Raniere's primary enforcer in maintaining control over their victims. But here's what's truly disturbing about Mack's role in this organization. She wasn't some desperate person who got in over her head. She was a successful actress with financial independence, career opportunities, and the resources to leave at any time. Instead, she chose to abandon her television career, move across the country to be closer to Raniere, and dedicate her life to building what federal prosecutors described as a criminal enterprise designed for sexual exploitation. The evidence against Mack is overwhelming, and much of it comes from her own words. Federal investigators recovered thousands of text messages, emails, and recorded conversations that show her actively participating in the recruitment and abuse of other women. In one recorded conversation with Raniere, she discusses the logistics of branding ceremonies with the casual tone of someone planning a dinner party. These recordings reveal a level of calculated cruelty that goes far beyond someone who was simply following orders. Mack can be heard discussing how to make the branding process more painful, how to position women to create maximum psychological impact, and how to use the recordings of these ceremonies as blackmail material to prevent victims from leaving the organization. What's particularly chilling about these conversations is how they reveal Raniere and Mack's sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation. They discuss specific techniques for breaking down women's resistance, methods for isolating them from friends and family, and strategies for making victims believe that their abuse was actually a form of spiritual growth. The scope of their operation was staggering. According to court documents, DOS recruited approximately 150 women who were subjected to various forms of abuse and exploitation. These women were required to provide collateral in the form of nude photographs, damaging personal information, or rights to their financial assets before being allowed to join what they thought was a women's empowerment group. Once they provided this collateral, these women entered a nightmare that would destroy their lives in ways they never imagined possible. The collateral wasn't just insurance against them leaving the organization. It was the foundation of a blackmail system so sophisticated that victims would endure years of abuse rather than risk having their most intimate secrets exposed to the world. And this is where Allison Mack's confession becomes absolutely crucial to understanding how this operation functioned. Because according to her own admissions, she wasn't just following Ranier's orders. She was actively innovating new methods of control and manipulation that made the entire system more effective at trapping and exploiting women. In her recent podcast appearance, Mack describes using her celebrity status as what she calls a power tool to convince women to join DOS. But what she's not fully acknowledging is how calculated and predatory these recruitment efforts actually were. Court documents reveal that Mack specifically targeted women who were struggling with personal issues, recent breakups, career disappointments, or family problems. She would present herself as someone who had overcome similar challenges through her work with Ranier, offering these women hope and a path forward. But what she was actually doing was identifying their psychological vulnerabilities and using that information to manipulate them into a situation where they could be systematically exploited. The recruitment process itself was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Potential DOS members weren't told they were joining a secret organization. Instead, they were invited to participate in what Mack described as an exclusive women's empowerment group that would help them overcome their limitations and achieve their goals. The women were told that membership in this group required absolute commitment and secrecy, but this was framed as necessary protection for the revolutionary techniques they would be learning. They were required to meet weekly, complete assignments designed to push their boundaries, and maintain complete confidentiality about their participation. But as these women became more involved, the assignments became increasingly invasive and degrading. They were required to follow restrictive diets that left them constantly hungry and physically weakened. They were given sleep deprivation assignments that impaired their judgment and decision-making abilities. They were required to take cold showers and perform other uncomfortable tasks designed to break down their resistance to authority. What makes this process so insidious is how gradually it escalated. Each assignment was presented as a step toward personal growth and empowerment. Women who questioned or resisted were told they were sabotaging their own development and letting down their sisters in the group. Those who complied were praised and told they were making breakthrough progress. And throughout this entire process, Allison Mack was positioned as a mentor and guide who had successfully navigated these challenges herself. Her celebrity status gave her credibility, and her apparent success and confidence made her seem like proof that the program actually worked. Women trusted her because she seemed to have everything they wanted in their own lives. But according to the evidence presented at trial, Mack was simultaneously reporting back to Ranier about each woman's progress, vulnerabilities, and potential resistance to more extreme demands. She was essentially conducting psychological assessments that would determine how far each woman could be pushed before she might try to leave or expose the organization. The most disturbing aspect of Mack's role becomes clear when you examine how the branding ceremonies were actually implemented. These weren't spontaneous rituals that developed organically within the group. They were carefully planned events designed to create maximum psychological trauma while maintaining plausible deniability for the organization's leadership. According to recorded conversations between Mack and Ranier, they spent considerable time discussing every aspect of these ceremonies. They talked about how to position the women to create the most intimidating atmosphere, how to use peer pressure to prevent anyone from backing out, and how to frame the experience as an honor rather than abuse. The women were told they would be receiving a small symbol representing the elements of nature. They weren't informed that the symbol actually contained the initials of both Ranier and Mack, permanently marking them as property of their abusers. This level of deception adds another layer of violation to an already traumatic experience. But what's truly shocking is how these ceremonies were conducted. The women were required to remove all their clothing and lie on a table while being physically restrained by other members of the group. The branding process itself took over 20 minutes, during which the smell of burning flesh filled the room, while the victim screamed in agony. And all of this was recorded on video, not for medical documentation or safety purposes, but to create additional collateral that could be used to blackmail the victims into silence. The recordings captured not just the physical branding, but the psychological breakdown of women who realized they had been deceived and trapped in a situation they never could have imagined. According to witness testimony, Allison Mack was present for multiple branding ceremonies and played an active role in restraining victims and operating the recording equipment. She watched women she had personally recruited experience excruciating pain and psychological trauma, and her response was to ensure the process was properly documented for future blackmail purposes. The level of betrayal involved in this process cannot be overstated. These were women who trusted Mack, who looked up to her as a role model and mentor. They believed she was helping them become stronger and more empowered versions of themselves. Instead, she was systematically destroying their ability to trust their own judgment and preparing them for sexual exploitation by Keith Raniere. Because the branding ceremonies weren't the end goal of the DOS operation, they were just another step in a process designed to break down women's psychological resistance to increasingly extreme demands. Once women had been branded and traumatized, they were much more likely to comply with assignments that included providing sexual services to Raniere and recruiting additional women into the same cycle of abuse. The evidence shows that Mack understood exactly how this system functioned and actively worked to make it more effective. She helped develop new recruitment strategies, participated in designing more psychologically damaging assignments, and served as Raniere's primary liaison in managing the growing network of women who had been trapped in their operation. What makes her recent confession so significant is not just that she's finally admitting her role in these crimes, but that she's acknowledging the calculated nature of her participation. For years, her legal team argued that she was another victim of Raniere's manipulation, someone who was brainwashed and coerced into committing acts she never would have chosen on her own. But her recent statements suggest a very different reality. She's now describing herself as someone who actively used her power and influence to advance Raniere's agenda, someone who understood the harm she was causing and continued anyway because she believed in the ultimate goals of their mission. This confession represents a fundamental shift in how we understand Mack's involvement in NXIVM because it reveals someone who wasn't simply following orders but was actively innovating methods of psychological control. The evidence shows she developed sophisticated techniques for identifying women's specific vulnerabilities and then exploiting those weaknesses to maximum effect. According to court documents, Mack created detailed profiles of potential recruits that included information about their relationships, career struggles, family dynamics, and personal insecurities. She would then craft individualized approaches designed to make each woman feel like DOS was the answer to their specific problems. This wasn't random recruitment. This was targeted psychological warfare disguised as friendship and mentorship. The manipulation didn't stop once women joined DOS. Mack implemented a system of escalating commitments that gradually normalized increasingly extreme behavior. Women who might never have agreed to be branded or provide sexual services were slowly conditioned through months of smaller violations that broke down their ability to recognize abuse. What's particularly chilling about Mack's methods is how she used her own apparent success and confidence to validate the program's effectiveness. Women who expressed doubts or concerns were told they were experiencing resistance because the program was working, that their discomfort was evidence they were breaking through their limitations. Mack positioned herself as living proof that enduring this process would lead to empowerment and transformation. But behind the scenes, she was reporting every detail of these women's psychological states back to Raniere. Text messages recovered by federal investigators show her providing detailed analysis of which women were most likely to comply with extreme demands, which ones might try to leave, and which ones could be pushed further without breaking completely. The systematic nature of this operation becomes even more disturbing when you examine how they manage the women who did try to resist or escape. Rather than simply letting them leave, Mack and Raniere implemented sophisticated retention strategies designed to pull them back into the organization or neutralize them as potential threats. Women who expressed doubts were subjected to intense psychological pressure from other group members who had been coached on exactly what to say. They were told they were abandoning their sisters, betraying their commitments, and throwing away their only chance at genuine growth and empowerment. The social pressure was overwhelming, especially for women who had already isolated themselves from friends and family outside the organization. For women who actually tried to leave, the collateral system became a weapon of psychological terrorism. They were threatened with the release of nude photographs, damaging personal information, or false accusations that could destroy their careers and relationships. The threat wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about complete social and professional annihilation. According to victim testimony, some women endured months or even years of additional abuse rather than risk having their collateral released. They knew their families would be devastated, their careers would be destroyed, and their reputations would never recover. The collateral system created a prison without bars, where victims became their own guards. And throughout this entire process, Allison Mack was positioned as the compassionate face of the organization, someone who understood their struggles and wanted to help them succeed. She attended their branding ceremonies not as a fellow victim, but as an authority figure ensuring the process was completed according to Raniere's specifications. Allison Mack's confession has finally pulled back the curtain on one of the most sophisticated psychological operations in modern American history. Her admission that she used her celebrity status as a power tool reveals the calculated cruelty behind NXIVM's facade of empowerment. The evidence is undeniable, the recordings are chilling, and the systematic nature of their crimes shows how easily manipulation can masquerade as mentorship. Understanding these tactics isn't just about exposing past horrors. It's about protecting future victims from predators who are still operating today.